Alright guys, I am going to do a very condensed video really quick, and I'm going to talk about some things you can encounter on your first Tri-5 Chevy small block build project car. I'm going to try to basically save some of you guys trouble of buying the wrong parts or getting misinformation or whatever. So I've built a lot of these cars. Doesn't make me an expert, never claimed to be. There's other guys out there with more experience and more cars, and good for them. But I get asked a lot of questions having the channel, so I get lots of emails, and there's a lot of them that are the same questions. So I'm going to try to do just a quickie video, and I'm going to cover a lot of stuff like upgrades and changes and stuff and things to look out for your first time Tri-5 build, 55, 56, 57 Chevy car build, and you're going to be running a small block. I got zero experience in LS, so you're at the wrong channel for that. Anyway, so what I'll cover right now is brakes. This is like the most common thing to swap on one of these cars. These cars originally came with a single reservoir master cylinder. A little square, boxy looking little thing goes on here. Has one single brake line coming out of it. They also had four-wheel drums. They had drum brakes. So back in the day, they didn't stop that great. Probably because the shoes were made out of inferior components. Nowadays you can get a nice quality metallic lined brake shoe, and if your brakes are properly adjusted and you had your drum surfaced at a shop, these cars will stop very well. So the problem with that, now for about the same price, before you spend all the money on your drum brakes, you can buy an aftermarket disc brake kit that's a direct bolt-on and you're done with it. I'll tell you, the biggest thing that a lot of people don't think about, they want to do the drums because they're on a budget. They think just replacing the drums and leaving it drum, they're saving money, and that's not the case. 9 out of 10 times when you drag one of these cars in, now I'm talking a car that has not ran in years, like a field car, something that was somebody's parts car or something. You drag one in, them old ball bearings are probably going to be bad. You'll get it running and driving, you'll take off down the highway and it'll sound like you're murdering somebody in there. Be all growling and howling. That's the old ball bearings. The disc brake kit comes with tapered roller bearings, so you don't have to mess with none of that. Go price on anywhere a outer wheel bearing, either inner or outer, for a factory 55 with the ball bearing, and it will change your mind. I want to say back when I last checked, those bearings were like 30 or 40 bucks each. There's two on each wheel. So the disc brake kit is about the same price to do it all. Now that's if you're replacing your wheel cylinders, your rubber brake hoses, your bearings, and you know, your shoes. Get a good quality line shoe, and then have your drums properly surfaced at a shop, you know, by a machine. So you're in better there. Now we'll tell you the best place to get them, in my opinion, and I've bought many and used many, is from Speedway Motors. You can buy a Tri-5 Chevy disc brake bolt-on kit for right at, well, I haven't priced it since all the prices went up so far, but this kit, when I bought it last year or a year and a half ago, whenever it was 250 bucks, and it came with everything. It came with the hoses, the bearings, calipers, rotors, everything. You can get two different ones. You can get a G-body or a Chevelle. These are the Chevelle. It's difference in brake caliper or brake rotor diameter. And I want to say it's like half-inch difference. I could be wrong. But somebody had mentioned that, door popped open on me. Somebody had mentioned in a video a long time ago that the G-body disc brake kit is unsafe on a Tri-5 Chevy because Tri-5 Chevys are heavy. That is absolutely not true. Look up the curb weight for a 55 Chevy and a curb weight to a G-body, and they're pretty much about the same. Some of the G-bodies that have T-tops or Astro roofs or stuff, those will be heavier than a Tri-5 Chevy. These cars aren't heavy like a lot of people think. They are not. So basically what I can tell you to break it down, if you're not sure which one you want to get, if you're going to be running some old 14-inch wheels on the front, like 14x6s or something like that, go with the G-body, because the G-bodies had 14-inch wheels. Now whether they'll actually work on the car, I couldn't tell you. But that's, if you're running a 15-inch wheel or bigger, go with the Chevelle. But that is pretty much the only difference. Now the caliper does go on the front up here instead of on the rear like you would see it on conventional cars, and that is per instructions the way that's done, and you won't notice anything different about it. I have heard guys complain, well, one guy in particular complained that when you put the disc brake kit on, it moves the wheels out 7/8 of an inch and they drive like crap. I've never noticed them driving any different, but anyway. So that's basically your disc brake kit. I would highly recommend the disc brake kit. It's going to be about the same money, and you're going to end up with tapered roller bearings instead of them stupid expensive ball bearings. Okay, now the other thing is the master cylinder. If you're on a budget, you don't need power brakes to run discs. You can run manual. And I can tell you the single reservoir master cylinder like original will stop the car with those disc brakes just fine. Now, those square-bodied master cylinders that these cars came with, now I haven't priced one in decades. They were expensive. I want to say back when I tried to find one, it was like 90 bucks or something ridiculous. I don't know what they are now. I don't even know if they reproduce one now. But back in the day, I would go out to salvage I knew of, and I got one and brought it home and tried rebuilding it with a kit, and it was so pitted inside that it wouldn't even take the kit. So I just gave up. What I found out was you can get a single reservoir master cylinder for a 62 Chevy pickup right here. Single reservoir master cylinder, and it'll bolt right on there. You do have to like lightly bend your brake line just a little bit to make it go in there. It's the same thread and everything, but the brake line, like how it bolts in, is a little bit different, so you just have to bend it a little bit. Now this is a 2-bolt mounting flange. Factory is 4. It'll take these two right here, right across from the big hole. So when you take your original master cylinder off, put your nuts back up here. That way it bolts your pedal assembly to your firewall. Now, one thing you can get in trouble with real quick is it'll seem fine while it's cool and you haven't drove the car yet. It's your adjustment for your rod back here off your brake pedal to your master cylinder. That is an adjustable unit. So be careful when you adjust that, and if you go too far, you may not notice it while it's cooled off, but the further you get down the road and the hotter the brakes get, it'll act like the brake's starting to lock up. And then once it cools down, it's fine again. It's because you got your rod adjusted too tight. So keep that in mind. Now, if you're going to have babies in the car, somebody you really care about, single reservoir master cylinders are dangerous. But I get it. 30 bucks versus 200 bucks. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Especially budget guys. If you're going to run a single reservoir master cylinder, be sure your emergency brake is adjusted and working, because you may have to use it. Basically, a single reservoir master cylinder like that means that chamber fills all 4 areas of the brakes. If one wheel cylinder blows out, or a hose starts leaking, or a line starts leaking, all the fluid will drip out of that. You won't have any brakes, so you'll have to use your emergency brake to stop. But anyway, I do get it that it's budget, and you should go with a dual. But keep in mind, when you go to dual, you've got to add some brake line stuff or do some brake line work. Nowadays, you can find this kit for right at around 200 bucks-ish. And this is actually for a Tri-5 Chevy. This is for a 55. And this is how it comes. Anyway, when you buy this unit, you need to make sure you know what your proportioning valve right here is for. Like this car, I put disc brakes on the front. It still has drum brakes in the rear. This proportioning valve is for disc front, drum rear. You can get them for drum, disc, or disc. So be sure you have that correct if it's a non-adjustable one, because it's all about pressure, and you're going to need that matched with what you have, or the car won't be braking correctly. If you're having issues, like you've done all this and you're having issues and the car doesn't act like it wants to stop, or your back brakes are locking up on you before the front does, you've probably got the wrong proportioning valve. Now I will tell you another thing while I'm here. I have always, for years, decades, run .3 brake fluid. That's what these cars had, was .3 brake fluid. You do not want to get .3 brake fluid anywhere near any paint. It will take it right off. Now, you can get .5. You can pour it on paint. It won't hurt it. It actually has a lower boiling point, so it takes a lot more heat. Like if you got brake lines close to the headers, .5 is the way to go. It's a lot more expensive, but it doesn't draw as much moisture as .3 does. .3 brake fluid, I want to say it's 2% moisture every year is what it draws into that master cylinder. So keep that in mind. If that car's been sitting for 10 years or 15, 20 years, you're going to have a lot of water in that master cylinder, in the brake system, in the fluid. So flush that brake fluid out if you can. But .5 is the way to go. Do not mix those two. Like if your car's got .3, don't just drain the master cylinder filled up with .5 and leave fluid in all the lines of the wheel cylinders, because it will not work out too good for you. But I now run .5 in that car, and it will be running this one. That way, in case I get a leak, I don't have to worry about it eating the paint off, my fresh paint that I'm going to be putting on the car. So anyway, that'll cover your brakes. That'll kind of get you through there on budget way to go or whatever. Now I want to talk about motor mounts. This is another one of my questions I get quite a bit. Now originally these cars, they came with a V8 small block 265 cubic inch engine, or 57, you got a 283. Or you could get a straight 6-cylinder. So if you got a straight 6, your engine mounts went in this hole right here at the front of the frame. If you got a V8, they go in the rear back here on both sides. So this is your V8, this is your 6. Originally these cars, the motor mounts bolt on the front of the block right here. That's like an L bracket looking thing, and then a stud with rubber cushions basically. That was a dangerous design. Basically GM changed it to a side mount. Somebody had said 58 because I wasn't ever sure. So I don't know if that's accurate or not. It's just what I was told. They went to side mounts in 58 from front mount. Now, if it, like for instance, you went out and you bought a 350 out of a Chevy truck or something at a salvage, and that's what you're going to put in your Tri-5 Chevy, it'll have the bosses on the side of the block to do side engine mounts, because this is right here will tell you why GM changed it. Back in the early 60s, my mom and dad had a two-door hardtop 55, and they were driving it. They were coming down a big hill, and the engine mount broke. When that engine mount broke up here, that engine fell down a little bit. What that does, when that engine goes down with the mechanical throttle linkage, it does that. So my dad just basically just shut the key off. And anyway, so it's dangerous. So I would highly recommend also, if you're having babies in the car, put side mounts in it. Now I know guys still running front mounts and they're not having any issues. I used to run a 400 small block in a 55 with front engine mounts and a cross member, which they say you're not supposed to use front mounts with rear cross members, but I did it for like 2 years and I never had any issues. But I didn't rip the car around like an idiot and drive like a moron, so it might not have tore anything up, you know what I mean? If you went out and rip-roared it, put slicks on it, try to pop wheelies or whatever with it, it probably would break something. But anyway, so the front engine mounts was original, side mounts is the way to go. Now I will tell you, while I'm here, you have your two mounting holes here, which are 3/8 by 16 thread size. If you go to side engine mounts from front mount, make sure you put a bolt in that hole right there. Make sure it's short. Don't put a really long bolt in there. Oil will come out of that hole. So if you're experiencing an oil leak and you can't find it, it's coming up here, that's where it's coming from if there's not a bolt in there. That is basically an open hole right directly to your fuel pump push rod in your block right there for your block mount fuel pump. You have a rod bolt in that, it will get up there on that fuel pump push rod and it'll just tear the crap out of it. So make sure that's a short bolt that you put in there. Anyway, so side mounts, when you go to buy them, keep in mind they're going to offer 2 sets and there's going to be a question about them. They're going to want to know if you want 3/4 of an inch forward or stock location on your engine mounts. Now the reason that they have 3/4 inch forward is because people like to run HEI distributors. That is my favorite distributor ever for a small block Chevy. It's maintenance free, 1-wire hookup, done. Every parts store in the country, when you walk in, is going to have HEI parts on the shelf somewhere, or even a complete HEI unit. So keep in mind, if you're out of state driving your car and it dies and something in the ignition goes bad, you can probably get an Uber to the parts store and get a part. I always carry a module, a coil, and an extra fuel pump in the car with a small toolkit. And if I ever get stalled on the side of the road somewhere, I can have the car going in probably 10 minutes and be back on my way instead of calling a tow truck. So I love the HEI. Some guys are into points. I like the HEI. It's maintenance free. Anyway, back to the motor mounts. So if you're going to run an HEI, the problem these cars had is the engine's too close to the firewall. So if you move it 3/4 forward, you gain a lot of clearance at the firewall for that big bodied HEI, because those distributors are giant compared to the old points distributors, are kind of tiny. So you can also get like an MSD distributor. It's electronic and it's small, like a coil or point style and stuff. But to me, I just like the HEI. It's inexpensive and maintenance free type of thing. So another thing you can do, if you are on severe budget, you still got your front engine mounts and you're dying to put an HEI in there, it's not the end of the world, because I've done it before. The motor mounts, or the body mounts on the car, all the body mounts on all the underneath of the car, this is basically how they're set up from GM. That metal sleeve right there is the size of sleeve that goes up in that body mount. It takes a 3/8 bolt. See how much room you have right there? Hot dog down a hallway. So you can loosen all your body mounts off, shove your body back on the chassis as far as it'll go, and you're going to gain a little bit of clearance. Now when I did mine on my first hardtop that way, because I didn't have any money, when I turned the distributor and got it about like that, it was barely touching the firewall. So I gained enough that I was comfortable with it. So I haven't ever beat a firewall in or anything for a small block with an HEI. If you feel like you got to, you can do that if you want. But I didn't do any firewall work to this car or that car for a distributor. I just moved the engine forward. Basically the filler that's on the firewall is just from the wrinkles and crap that's in the firewall from it being pressed at the factory in the machine. But anyway, the HEI for me is just the way to go. Everybody's different, but I like the HEI. It's inexpensive. Now on your engine mounts, when you buy a side mount kit, they're going to want to know stock location or 3/4 forward. So if you're not using an HEI, you can go stock location. They're also going to want to know what frame you have, because they offered 2 chassis for these cars. They offered a seamless frame and a seamed frame. And the difference is, if you see a weld seam down the center of that frame right here and on the very bottom in the same spot, that's a 2-piece or seamed frame. If it doesn't have a weld seam and it's all solid, it's a seamless frame. So they're going to want to know that. So keep that in mind. Now I will tell you, I bought a side mount kit from eBay, 32 bucks I think, with free shipping, which is the cheapest I've ever seen side engine mounts for one of these cars. And that was 3/4 forward. They didn't fit this chassis worth a flip. I could not get it to fit for nothing, so I went back and started measuring. Whoever built them, they got one side engine mount 3/4 or a 1/4 inch longer than the other one. They got it off by a 1/4 inch, so that engine would have been offset in there a 1/4 inch. How stupid is that? So buyer beware. Cheap is not good. Again, trying to save you guys from running into problems that I have. Now, another thing I will cover is, I'm going to cover this real quick while I'm here. This is something that guys may not have encountered yet, and you will, I promise you. Nowadays, most of the unleaded fuel you find at the pumps has 10% ethanol. It basically lowers the boiling point of the fuel. So it doesn't take much heat in an engine compartment to start the fuel boiling in that carburetor, and it causes vapor lock. Vapor lock is not a myth, it's the real deal. A lot of the old timers will tell you back when you could buy ethyl at the pump, guys were having vapor lock issues. Then they went to, leaded fuels and unleaded fuels, and it kind of went away. Now that they've put ethanol back in there, guess what? It's back. So what will happen is you will start your car up dead cold, you won't notice a thing. And this is mainly, I have ever noticed it was in the summertime, 90, 100 degree heat. You'll start your car up, it's just fine dead cold. You'll drive it downtown, you'll pull in to put gas in your car, you'll get back in, the car doesn't want to start. Because it's basically flooding over the vent tubes, the fuel's just boiling out, going right down the throat of the carburetor, flooding the engine. So when you do finally get it started, it blows all kinds of black smoke out. So they will also shut off going down the road. I know this for a fact because it done it to me 3 times in one route to the car show I was trying to make it to. It was like 94 degrees outside. The car died 3 times on the way there. What I found to fix it, cure-all, fix-all instantly, is a phenolic carb spacer. So get you a phenolic carb spacer and you won't have to worry about fuel boil again. So it basically isolates the hot intake manifold from the carburetor. Even if you run an RPM air gap intake that is separated, it will still get fuel boil to it. The engine that I had the problem with had an air gap on it. I put the phenolic spacer on it and it stopped it. Now I've got a 3/8 sized one on the 55 hardtop, which is kind of thin, and I think this one's a 1/2 inch. But they're around 20, 30 bucks for one, but it's a cure-all, fix-all. Now I will tell you, you can get a Demon, I think it's called a Road Demon carburetor. It looks like an Edelbrock or an AFB, Carter style carburetor, but it's a total redesign. It looks like one of these, but it's not. You can get one with a black composite, basically a plastic main body. I can tell you from personal experience, I got one brand new from Summit for $2.99 when I had an El Camino. I had a stock Goodwrench 350 bone stock. That was the best carburetor I've ever owned in my life. For bolting it on, adjusting air bleeds, that was it. That was an awesome carburetor. It had throttle response that you would not believe. So I loved that carburetor. If I had the money, I'd buy a brand new one for this car. And it still may get one later. But I love that carburetor. Now, as far as if you have a big cam and stuff like that, I don't know how that carburetor is going to act on there because the one I had was a stock cam. But that car run fantastic with that little demon on it. And it was a composite main body, so I didn't need the phenolic spacer. So there is that option. But now I'm going to talk about fuel pumps. So if you're running a carburetor, you want like a 6.5, 7 psi fuel pump. So what I did on my very first 55, it still had the front mounts on it, the original mounts. I bought the big Holley mechanical chrome fuel pump that takes 3/8 size fuel line. It's a big bodied sucker. It wouldn't go on the engine. It was smashed against the frame cradle down here. So I didn't end up using it. I went with a Holley electric fuel pump back in the back by the tank. Electric pumps are supposed to be mounted very close to the tank. So I bolted it on there. That was the most loud, obnoxious thing I ever had in my life. It lasted 2 months. It went out. It wouldn't ever come back on. I bought another one, put on there, and it lasted, but I would notice sometimes in the wintertime if it was really cold, the fuel pump didn't want to come on. So I'd have to get in there and tap on it with a plastic end of the handle of a screwdriver to get that pump to start kicking. So that was my experience with fuel pumps. Now I know there's many out there, there's a lot better designs now, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm not an electric fuel pump guy. So I like my mechanical pumps. They're quiet. That's a 10-minute job, if that, to change it right on the block and be done and back on the road. So I like mechanical. Now this is the small-bodied Holley, but you can't really put a 3/8 fuel line on it. You can with this fitting right here that is that's like trying to put a 1/2-inch fuel line on a 1/4-inch fitting. You know what I mean? It's just, you know what I mean? Anyway, I've got mine set up for 5/16 because I'm running a 305 and I don't need a lot of fuel. This is a cruiser, it's not a race car. But anyway, that small-bodied Holley will work just fine. But Edelbrock has a big-bodied one as well, and it runs into issues too. Now, even if you buy a stock replacement fuel pump from your local parts store for like a 1979 Chevy pickup 350, non-vent or non-return, it's just an inlet and an outlet, you'll run into trouble with this as well. That inlet right here, this part right here, I have seen it. When I put one on a car one time, it was touching the frame. So what I did was I stuck a screwdriver down inside that tube and I bent it up a little bit, and that allowed me to get the hose and the clamp on there. What happened about a week later is the car died and didn't want to start. Wasn't getting hardly any fuel to it. What it ended up doing was the engine torques. When you goose the throttle, the engine goes up on the driver's side like this. So it was smashing that into the frame. So it ended up kinking that. So be aware of that as well. Now you can either go in here with a torch and heat this up and bend it down, or go in there with a hammer and just beat the living crap out of it. Or what I like to do is put pipe caps in there. You can get pipe caps like this. I get them from my local steel supplier. These are cut off of steel pipe. This is the ends. They have shallow ones and they have deep ones. Now the ones I usually use is the shallow ones, but they are about this diameter. And I go in here and I hole saw this frame and I lay that pipe cap in there flush, and then I weld it and grind it, and it looks like it's part of the frame, but you've got a little bitty clearance dome in there for your fuel pump. So you can run that bigger Holley one if you want. Now if you're going to run one that's big like this, which you can, be sure and drill a hole in the bottom of that so water or fuel leak or whatever that can drain out into the frame. So don't be worried about drilling a hole in it and you're worried about water going down in your frame, because you got all these other holes in the frame that do that exact same thing for you. So anyway guys, trying to just kind of speed through here and get some stuff done. But anyway, when you move your engine 3/4 of an inch forward to side engine mounts, be aware that your drive shaft is going to now be sticking out of the tail shaft 3/4 of an inch. That could cause a vibration. So if you're going to do engine mounts and you're going to do your cross member and all that, which I can tell you if you're going to do a rear cross member kit, the cheapest place I have found to buy one is Speedway. I want to say it used to be like 89 bucks or something for the cross member kit. That is the way to go without question. So anyway, you need to remove your original mounts off the frame. I guess you don't technically have to, but for clearance for things, I always remove them. But when you go to do your cross member and your engine mounts, if you're going to do that, you need to be aware of how you're setting your car up. Like on my hardtop, this thing is raked. I got 17-inch wheels on the front, 18s in the back, so the car has a little bit of a rake to it. I like that about that. If you're going carbureted, this is the main thing if you're going carbureted. If you're going to go, kind of level like I am, on this car, what you want to do is level the chassis with, make sure the chassis is level, perfectly level. Once it's level, then set up your engine and trans together in the car, and you'll either want to set a bubble level or an angle finder on where your carburetor mounts on your intake manifold. You can just set your intake on there. But anyway, when that is zero or bubble levels dead middle on that carburetor flange, that's where you want to weld up your mounts or do whatever, because that engine's where it needs to be. I can tell you because these things have 3 degrees put in them. When that carburetor flange is level, you've automatically got 3 degrees down on your transmission. So your rear end, your pinion is 3 degrees down. When you put a car in gear, your pinion rides up, and that's what puts it 3 degrees in line with your tail shaft. So when you're setting this up, make sure that carburetor is level. Because if you've ever looked at an intake from the side, it's shallower at the front than it is the rear. It's a lot taller. That is your 3 degrees right there. So when that carburetor flange is dead level, that means the tail shaft's where it needs to be. So that's all you need to worry about. You don't need a fancy angle finder, none of that crap. A bubble level dead center will get you right there where it needs to be. Now, here's the problem. If you set everything up level, and then you end up with a 3/4 inch rake like I do, you're going to have a taller level in your float bowl in the front than you are the rear, because your carburetor is now sitting at an angle. So it's not a big deal. You're going to set your float levels, you know what I mean? But just basically trying to run you through some of the basics here. As far as headers, headers is usually what people do. It's just easy. You buy a set, you bolt them on, you're pretty much kind of done. It's easier to build your own exhaust, I think. But they do come with problems. Sometimes if you buy full length or long tube headers, they interfere with things. Like you sometimes have to trim off the ear on the transmission right here, or you have to remove your old original side, power glide mounts is what I call them, but it's the same for a 3-speed standard as well. But anyway, the full length headers, the problem that I always had was hot start issues. If you put headers on and you put a starter on there, like a stock GM starter, you will notice that after you drive the car and shut it off, it doesn't want to start. It acts like the battery's dead because the starter solenoid is heat soaked from heat from the headers. I tried a heat shield. I even tried a Ford remote solenoid. A buddy of mine told me to do that. So I did all this crap and it didn't fix it. The Cure-All Fix-All is a mini starter. Those little bitty mini starters, you get them at Summit. They're like 120 bucks. Bolt it on and you're done. So that is another thing that can bite you in the rear end. Also, if you're going to put your battery in the trunk, make sure you have grounds everywhere. You want your body grounded, you want your chassis grounded, and you want your engine grounded. That way you have a full ground circuit throughout the car. If you don't have proper grounding on your engine or car, basically, you have weird things happen with your electric that doesn't make sense. So if something's not making sense, try putting grounds on it. Your engine does not ground through the engine mounts unless they are solid motor mounts, like racing motor mounts with no isolation in them. The urethane mounts or the rubber mounts, they will not ground. If you put a meter on here on squawk and you put it from here to here, it's not going to pick it up. So they do not ground through the engine. I had a guy argue with me one time years ago about that. So ground your engine to your frame to your body, whatever you need to do. If you're going to go to the trunk, you need a very large diameter cable. Don't put some teeny tiny little cable on there, because that battery's got to pull that juice all the way from back there to up here. And you generally need a pretty large size battery to get that up here. Now a mini starter definitely helps with that over a stock starter. So that's if you're doing a trunk mount. But I will tell you, be careful when you are putting your battery cable on if you have headers. You do not want that battery cable anywhere near that header tube where it can, short across it. It'll make your battery blow up, it'll make it foam. I mean, it does all kinds of crazy stuff. Make your wiring in your car go haywire. So be aware of that. I will tell you another thing, if you guys are not very savvy on carburetors, the Edelbrock style carburetors are the best way to go if you're not a carburetor guru. These are pretty forgiving for those guys. You basically just have to set your 2 metering jets right here, or metering air bleeds. I can tell you, you can listen to that and turn it while you're listening to the engine sitting there idle, and just listen for the highest idle point and leave it there. The best way to do it is with a vacuum gauge. You adjust it for your highest vacuum reading is all you're doing. So you want to keep that in mind. With the dual plane intake, if you've got this one set lean and this one set rich, these plugs over here are going to get black. These over here will be brown. So keep that in mind. You need these adjusted right. So what else can I cover? I think that's about it, guys. I will tell you on ball joints, you can get really, really inexpensive, overseas ball joints. Be careful, because the ones I got a long time ago didn't even have grease zerks in them. So there wasn't even a hole there for a grease zerk. So they're non-greasable like new model cars are. So they're not going to last very long. You probably could drill them and tap them, but you're going to have drill shavings down in there, because they're probably going to be pre-greased, and that drill shaving is going to get down in there, you know what I mean? You could possibly get it out with a little pin magnet or something, but I just ended up sending them back, and I went ahead and bought, grease zerked ones. So that is another thing that can bite you in the rear end. What else? What else? I think that's about it. There's always a debate. Lots of guys think it's a necessity. I do not. It's just me. The rear shock bars. There's lots of guys that think you have to have that or it'll break your body all apart. So that is absolutely not true. Back when these cars were new in the 50s and even up in the 60s, they didn't have roads then like they had now. Most of the roads were dirt, gravel, and clay and junk. They would beat a car to death. We have nicer roads nowadays in most cases. You get what I'm saying? You got more paved roads out there than what there used to be. So you don't necessarily need a shock bar. I promise you. I don't run them, but some people think they have to have them. If you're going to run a coilover shock in the back without leaf springs, then yeah, you probably ought to put a shock bar back there. But if you're running your old leafs and stuff, you don't need a shock bar. Is there anything else I can cover? I think that's about it. I will cover an old myth. This was common to hear back in the 90s, using urethane body mounts. These are urethane, not rubber. These do not squish as far as rubber. I have done urethane since the 90s. I had one guy tell me, actually a couple different people tell me, they squeak. They do not. I have never, ever had urethane body mounts squeak on me on any of my cars. I've done G-bodies and I've done Tri-5 Chevys. I've never had that happen. I don't know. What I think is somebody actually used a bolt that the shoulder right here was too long on. The bolt tightened down because it got to the shoulder and couldn't go anymore, and there's a little bit of slack in there, and that's probably what caused the body to squeak a little bit. But that's just my opinion. I don't know for sure. I'm just telling you. I've never had a squeak, so don't listen to somebody to tell you that, especially if you're messing with one of these, because I haven't had it happen. But anyway, guys, again, I'm not trying to sound like a know-it-all smart aleck, and I know it all. Listen to me, do what I say. I'm not doing that. I'm basically running you through basic things with these cars. For the first time builder, you're dragging one in, you don't know what you need to know on these cars yet. And I'm going to steer you in the direction to help you out. Now, I am for the budget guys. I'm not talking about those guys with wallets this thick and they got $50,000 in their bank account, because they're just going to go in and open a catalog and buy every best parts money can buy. This is for the guys that have to pinch pennies, to get by, and that's the way I have always been. I have never ever been able to buy a nice Tri-5 Chevy. I've had to buy garbage that didn't have engines in them or stripped apart parts cars, and then I turn them into something. That right there is proof. So there's other guys out there that's been doing it way longer than me. I've got a lot of respect for a lot of guys, especially over at tri5.com. That's another thing. If you're going to drag in your first one, you got any questions, that's where you need to go. tri5.com. There are some knowledgeable guys on there that will send you in the right direction. Keep in mind, don't go just sign up at that website and immediately ask a question. You need to go to the welcome section of the forum and introduce yourself. I think it is the introduction page. And tell what car you have. That way those guys will know who you are at that point, and they'll know what kind of vehicle you're working on. And do a search. Before you go in and just ask a question, to go in the search box and type in exactly what you're asking. You're probably going to find it on there. Because, when that question gets asked 5,000 times a month, those guys probably get a little tired of hearing it. I've been a member there since like 05 or 06, and there are lots of guys on there that are way more knowledgeable than me. I can tell you my version on these cars, I've never done an all original car, numbers matching, date coded crap. I've never done that. So that's the stuff I'm in the dark on. But when it comes to putting a 350 and a turbo 350 in one of these, that's what I can do, because it's mostly what I've all done, you know what I mean? But I highly recommend that forum. It is a great forum. I rarely go there anymore. I haven't even signed up on there or logged in. I don't even know what my password is anymore, to be honest with you. I don't even go over there anymore because I started my YouTube channel. And by the time I do work, you know, I don't want to go in there and, you know, type out a bunch of crap and that stuff like that. It's just, you know, the YouTube for me is a lot easier. I can just talk about it, post a video, and I'm done. So I type with one finger. I never took a typing class, so it takes me a long time to type stuff. So, not to tell you the other thing, I don't check my emails very often. I actually checked my emails today, and I haven't checked them in probably a month. So, it seems like all that's ever in there is questions or spam. I get lots of spam stuff in there, just stupid stuff. So, anyway, guys, hopefully I can help some of you guys out that, like if you haven't ever done this before, and I'm sorry these videos get long, I am, but I try to be as thorough on my explanation as I can be, and I try to cover a whole bunch of crap. That's like a broad spectrum of stuff, but you know, you're going to have to know it. I will tell you this, I'm going to go ahead and run you through PCV system real quick. This can get you in trouble as well. So depending on what your engine is, if it does not have a road draft tube coming out of the back of it, going down the side of the block, which stink to high heaven when you're sitting at a stoplight when that engine's up to temp. If you have a newer engine that had a PCV system without a road draft tube, you're going to need to put a PCV system on it or stick a breather in each valve cover. Now in this case, on both of these cars, I'm running the old school Chevrolet valve covers. I put a baffle in my valve covers to run a PCV valve. With a proper working PCV system, you need fresh air in, dirty air out. Your PCV valve is your dirty air out. That needs to be baffled or it will pull oil out of that valve cover, I promise you. It's not necessarily that it gets submerged. It's when your engine's at high RPM, like driving down the highway 65 miles an hour, this is nothing but a heavy misted spray of oil on the top of these valve covers, and push rods are just throwing that oil up there. So that PCV valve will suck the oil right out of that engine down its throat. So you'll think you've got a bad engine, a broken ring, you know, something wrong, and all it is that PCV valve. You need a baffle. And I'm not talking a splash shield like you get with aftermarket tall valve covers, aluminum valve covers. If it's open, oil's going to go right to that PCV valve. That's a 3/8 size line on there, and that would be equivalent of hooking up a little shop vac on there. It's just going to suck the oil right out of it. These baffles that I use are out of late 70s to mid-ish 80s stock valve covers. It is a big square piece that goes almost all the way to the bottom of the head right there. It's about that wide, and it has a stepped style design. This is how GM designed it. And I go in and I plug weld it in there, and then I put a new grommet in there, and it keeps it from pulling as much oil out. It messes up a Chevrolet script, you know what I mean? But I don't care because it's function over form at this point. But I don't want to do anything to this valve cover. I'll leave it nice, but I'll put my front oil fill in here for my fresh air in. So PCV is fresh air in, dirty air out. So mine has the PCV valve back there with the 80s model baffle welded into it. And then right here is my fresh air in, and that is a vent right there. That's a breather. So it's also easier to put oil in these engines with this too, in my opinion. But anyway, you get a more stock look that way. Some people ain't into that. But you can put just a breather on this side, or you can put a hose from this side to the bottom of your air cleaner and then have your PCV over there. That's fresh air in, dirty air out. But keep that in mind. Just wanted to cover that really quick. I'm sorry a video's long, guys. Thanks for watching.